In a moment of stark humiliation, a single harsh command reduced him to silence in a crowded cabin, exposing a lifetime of unspoken injustices. Every degrading word and dismissive glance stung, echoing the scars of a world that had long overlooked his worth. That crushing encounter sparked a defiant resolve in him, a journey from shame to the relentless pursuit of dignity and truth. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The early morning light had barely broken over the horizon when the airport awoke in a quiet, determined rush. The air was cool, carrying with it a mix of fresh dew and the faint, lingering scent of coffee from a nearby cafes. As the great glass facade of the terminal caught the first rays of sunlight, every surface shimmered with promise. The gentle hum of engines, soft murmurs of travelers, and the distant echo of announcements blended into a symphony of beginnings. It was as if the airport itself was a living creature, breathing in the hope and anxiety of those about to embark on new journeys. Among the throng of early risers was Veronica Steele, a woman whose presence was as steady as it was enigmatic. Clad in the crisp uniform of a flight attendant, she moved through the terminal with an effortless grace. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back, framing a face that carried both kindness and a hint of melancholy. To the casual observer, she was just another friendly attendant ensuring that every traveler felt cared for. But beneath her calm exterior lay a secret so profound that it weighed on her like both a blessing and a burden. Veronica had chosen this modest role not out of necessity, but as a deliberate escape from a world that too often defined people by wealth and status. Her secret fortune, amounting to billions, was something she guarded fiercely. It was a secret that allowed her to see life without the distortions of money, to feel true empathy for every person crossing her path. Every gesture she made was deliberate. When she smiled at an anxious passenger or lent a hand to someone struggling with heavy luggage, there was an authenticity in her eyes that spoke of a deep understanding of human frailty. Yet, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Veronica's mind often wandered back to the luxurious penthouse she once called home, a life of opulence that she had willingly left behind in search of something more meaningful. Here, in the bustling anonymity of the airport, she could blend in with everyday people and observe life as it truly was, free from the isolating glare of privilege. Working closely alongside her was Monica, a colleague whose warm smile and gentle demeanor were a stark contrast to the sometimes harsh realities of the job. Monica admired Veronica not only for her impeccable professionalism, but also for the way she seemed to carry an unspoken weight with quiet dignity. Monica had been with the airline for years, and while she never pried into Veronica's private life, she often sensed that there was more to her friend than met the eye. In the small moments between the rush of boarding and announcements, Monica would catch Veronica staring out of a window, lost in thought. It was during these times that Monica wondered if Veronica ever regretted the life she had left behind, or if the humble uniform she wore had become a part of her soul. In a distant corner of the terminal, past the familiar hum of conversation and the rolling of suitcase wheels, moved another figure who carried his own story etched into every step. Darius Johnson was a man whose presence demanded attention, even if it came not through loud words, but through the quiet strength in his stride. Darius's skin, a deep shade of brown, spoke of a heritage rich with stories of struggle and perseverance. Life had not been easy for him. From a young age, he had encountered challenges that forced him to grow up quickly, learning to navigate a world that often judged him before even knowing his name. Today, as he made his way toward his gate, Darius's eyes were alert and watchful, taking in every detail of the scene around him. He was not a man easily intimidated. His face, set in lines of both resolve and quiet sorrow, bore witness to years of overcoming obstacles, each one leaving its mark, each one forging him into someone who refused to be defined by the biases of society. Darius's journey was not merely one of physical travel, but also one of inner reflection. Every step he took was an act of defiance against the subtle injustices that had shadowed his life. With each boarding pass he clutched, he carried the weight of unspoken challenges, a daily reminder that the world could be harsh, but that his spirit was unbreakable. As he walked, he noticed the smallest details, the way a tearful goodbye was exchanged between a parent and child, the hurried apologies of a stranger bumping into another, and even the faint smile of someone who had just experienced a moment of unexpected kindness. All these fragments of life blended into a mosaic that made Darius see beauty even in moments of chaos. The morning unfolded like a carefully written story, with each character playing their part in a larger narrative that was still being written. Veronica, with her secret wealth and humble exterior, and Darius, with his quiet dignity and relentless resilience, were destined to cross paths. Their meeting, though seemingly trivial at first, would carry the weight of hidden histories and unspoken truths. The airport, with its ever-changing flow of human emotions, became a stage where fate choreographed a subtle dance of conflict and connection. As Veronica moved from one duty to the next, she took special care to greet each passenger with genuine warmth. Her voice, soft yet firm, carried an undercurrent of authority that reassured those who might have felt lost in the maze of terminals. There was a grace in her actions, a measured cadence that spoke of years of experience and the wisdom gleaned from both hardship and triumph. She helped a frazzled mother secure her child's seat, lent an understanding ear to a traveler who had missed a flight, and even shared a brief moment of laughter with an elderly man who had all but given up hope of reuniting with a long-lost friend. Every encounter was a reminder that behind every ticket and every departure lay a story worth hearing. For Veronica, these interactions were more than just a job, they were lessons in empathy and resilience. She knew that the people passing through the terminal carried burdens invisible to the naked eye. Some were fleeing from pain, while others were chasing dreams that seemed just out of reach. In this swirling mix of hopes and despairs, Veronica found purpose. It was not enough for her to simply serve. She sought to connect, to remind each person that they were seen and valued, no matter how insignificant they might feel in the vast machinery of travel. Meanwhile, Darius found himself drawn to small commotion near one of the boarding gates. A misunderstanding had arisen. An issue as trivial as a misplaced announcement had sparked a brief moment of discord. Darius's eyes narrowed as he observed the scene, the calm in his expression belying the inner storm of indignation that threatened to rise. He had been on the receiving end of such misunderstandings before, often feeling that the rules of the world were designed to keep him in his place. Today, however, something was different. Perhaps it was the way the situation unfolded or the subtle shift in the air that made him feel that change was in the making. In that charged moment, Veronica's path intersected with Darius's in a way that neither could have anticipated. She had been attending to a passenger when she noticed Darius standing a little too close to the restricted area. In a voice that was both commanding and tinged with frustration, she called out, asking him to step back and follow the proper protocol. Her words, though firm, carried an edge of something deeper, a protective instinct born of years of watching the world treat people like him unfairly. Darius paused, his gaze meeting hers, and for a moment, the bustle of the terminal seemed to fade into a background murmur. There was a silent exchange in that instant, a collision of worlds where pride met empathy, and the weight of unspoken histories hung between them. For Darius, the rebuke stung not merely because of the words, but because it echoed the countless times he had been dismissed or misunderstood. Yet as he met Veronica's steady eyes, he sensed that her anger was not born solely from a desire to enforce rules. There was something more, a hint of personal pain, perhaps even regret. In that brief, charged pause, the spark of conflict was lit, but it was also tempered by the promise of understanding. It was as if both of them, in their own way, were silently challenging the world's tendency to judge too quickly, to box people into roles defined by their past and their appearance. The tension in that moment was palpable, a delicate balance between duty and emotion. Veronica's words had been sharp, yet beneath them lay a vulnerability that few ever saw. And Darius, standing his ground, felt a mixture of indignation and reluctant curiosity. Who was this woman who wielded her authority like a shield, yet seemed so profoundly affected by the injustices that marked his own life? The question lingered in the air, mingling with the distant sounds of rolling suitcases and departing flights. As the minutes passed and the commotion subsided, the normal rhythm of the airport began to reassert itself. Veronica resumed her rounds with the same measured grace, her face returning to its mask of calm professionalism. Yet in the quiet recesses of her mind, she replayed the encounter like a half-forgotten dream, a moment where the boundaries between duty and personal conviction had blurred. Every now and then, a fleeting memory of her former life in lavish surroundings would surface, reminding her of a life she had sacrificed for the sake of authenticity. It was a bittersweet trade-off, one that filled her with both pride and an aching loneliness. Darius, on the other hand, sank into a seat near his gate, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. He reflected on the incident with a mixture of irritation and a strange, emerging respect. It was unusual for him to feel seen by someone in a position of power, especially when that power was often wielded in ways that only deepened the divide between people. Yet in Veronica's stern gaze, he saw a spark of recognition, a silent admission that life was not always as black and white as it seemed. It was this subtle complexity that drew him in, even as he grappled with the frustration of being spoken to as if he were less than he was. Throughout the morning, the airport continued its steady pulse of activity. Passengers hurried along, announcements were made, and lives briefly intersected in ways that sometimes went unnoticed. But for Veronica and Darius, that singular moment of tension had set the stage for something larger, a collision of ideals and personal truths that would challenge the preconceived notions each held about the other. The air was thick with unspoken promises of change, of a future where empathy might bridge even the widest of divides. In the midst of this orchestrated chaos, small details held great significance. A dropped coin glimmered on the floor, catching the light as a traveler stooped to pick it up, reminding everyone that even in the grand dance of departure and arrival, the simplest of moments could carry unexpected meaning. A gentle breeze that wafted through an open door carried with it the distant sound of a child's laughter, momentarily softening the edges of a world that too often seemed harsh and unforgiving. And in these fleeting instances, both Veronica and Darius found themselves, if only for a moment, wondering about the nature of their own stories. Veronica's secret, hidden away beneath layers of duty and carefully maintained routine, was a constant companion in her heart. It was a secret that had defined her choices, influencing her decision to live a life far removed from the opulence that many would envy. Instead of being defined by her wealth, she had chosen to immerse herself in the raw, unfiltered reality of everyday struggles. It was a life that allowed her to see beauty in the small acts of kindness and to understand the true cost of injustice. As she moved through the terminal, every interaction became a lesson in humility and strength, a reminder that the value of a person was measured not by their bank balance, but by the depth of their compassion. Darius, too, was on a journey that was as much about the destination as it was about understanding the world around him. Every time he encountered an unexpected gesture or a harsh word, it was a reminder of the challenges he had faced and the resilience that had grown in response. His heart was a mosaic of scars and hopes, each piece reflecting a time when he had been forced to stand up against a tide of prejudice. And though he carried these memories with a quiet dignity, he was not immune to the pain they brought. Yet, in that pain lay a determination to seek out moments of truth, to find a spark of light in the midst of darkness. The morning wore on, and the ebb and flow of the crowd continued unabated. Veronica's path and Darius's, though momentarily intertwined, soon diverged as new passengers boarded and familiar routines resumed. Yet the encounter had left an indelible mark on both of them, a subtle shift in the way they viewed each other and themselves. There was no dramatic confrontation in that brief meeting, no loud declaration that would echo through the terminal. Instead, there was a quiet understanding that each of them carried burdens unseen by others, and that in those burdens lay the seeds of empathy and change. As the sunlight grew stronger and the day fully claimed its space, the terminal pulsed with renewed energy. Veronica continued to glide through the crowds, her steps measured and her gaze steady, even as she carried the weight of her secret in silence. Darius, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, prepared himself for the next phase of his journey, a journey that, unbeknownst to him, was about to take an unexpected turn. In that vast, echoing space where countless lives intersected, the stage had been set for a transformation that neither could foresee. The simple act of a stern command had opened a door to deeper understanding, a silent promise that beneath every rough exterior lay a story of pain, resilience, and the possibility of redemption. And as the day unfolded, both Veronica and Darius would come to realize that the true journey was not just one of miles traveled, but one of personal growth and the unyielding power of human connection. In the gentle hum of the terminal, amid the whispered hopes and hidden regrets of so many souls, their stories had just begun to intertwine. Each step taken in that bustling corridor was a step toward a future where judgments could be set aside and where understanding might flourish even in the most unexpected places. The airport, a microcosm of life itself, had borne witness to their brief encounter, a moment of tension that hinted at the conflicts yet to come and the personal transformations that awaited them both. And so, in the midst of routine departures and arrivals, two lives, marked by quiet strength and hidden sorrows, began to converge. It was a convergence that would slowly unravel the layers of misunderstanding, expose the scars of past injustices, and ultimately pave the way for a meeting of hearts, a meeting where empathy and respect would challenge the forces of prejudice and redefine what it meant to be truly seen. As the day advanced and passengers continued to stream in and out, the echoes of that early morning confrontation lingered like a soft refrain, a reminder that even the smallest interactions could set off ripples that changed the course of lives. Veronica's secret, locked away beneath the polished exterior of her uniform, and Darius's steadfast determination to rise above the injustices of a divided world, were threads in a larger tapestry that was just beginning to take shape. Each thread, no matter how seemingly insignificant, played a part in weaving a narrative of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of compassion. In the quiet moments that followed the initial encounter, as Veronica prepared for her next call and Darius gathered his thoughts before the next boarding announcement, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that life was not as simple as following orders or meeting expectations. Instead, it was a journey marked by the unexpected, by moments when the truth was revealed in the subtlest of glances, and by the silent, enduring promise that every individual, regardless of their background, carried a story worth listening to. The early morning's tranquility gradually gave way to the full bustle of a day in motion. Veronica's steps remained deliberate as she navigated the crowded halls, her heart a quiet repository of dreams deferred and hopes nurtured in secret. Darius, too, found himself reflecting on the encounter as he watched the world around him, each face, each whispered conversation, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And in that vast, ever-changing scene, the promise of understanding and growth glowed softly, inviting both him and Veronica to continue their journeys with a renewed sense of purpose. It was in this ordinary yet extraordinary moment, in the interplay of light and shadow, sound and silence, that the true story began to take shape, a story of two souls whose lives were destined to collide, challenging preconceptions and revealing the hidden truths that lay beneath the surface of everyday existence. As they moved forward, both would come to realize that the lines separating wealth from poverty, judgment from compassion, and duty from genuine care were far more fragile than they appeared. In the grand tapestry of life unfolding within the busy terminal, every encounter was a chance to learn, to grow, and to rediscover the beauty of simply being human. And so, with the steady rhythm of footsteps and the soft murmur of voices as their constant companions, Veronica and Darius embarked on a day that promised more than just travel. It promised a glimpse into the depths of what it meant to fight for dignity, to hold on to hope in the face of adversity, and to find strength in the connections that bind us all together, even in a place as vast and impersonal as an airport. Their journey had only just begun, and already the seeds of change had been sown in a single, fateful moment. In that moment, as the light grew warmer and the sounds of departure filled the air, both Veronica and Darius carried with them the unspoken understanding that life, with all its twists and turns, was full of surprises. It was a day that would eventually lead to revelations and confrontations, moments of anger and bursts of compassion, and ultimately, a path toward personal growth that neither could have imagined. And as they each continued on their respective paths, the early morning encounter lingered as a promise that every story, no matter how ordinary it might seem at first, held within it the power to transform, to heal, and to remind us all of the beauty that lies hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. The plane's steady hum continued as the earlier tension rippled into a deeper, quieter undercurrent. After the brief, charged exchanges of the morning, the journey pressed on. Veronica moved down the aisle with her practiced calm, yet each step seemed to carry the weight of every word spoken and every unspoken regret. Her eyes, though warm and inviting to the passengers she served, betrayed a hidden storm of emotions. She remembered the look in Darius's eyes earlier, the mix of hurt, defiance, and an unspoken question that haunted her even now. Darius sat by the window, watching the endless sky slowly shift from pale blue to the soft blush of early afternoon. He couldn't shake the feeling that the earlier confrontation was more than just a moment of strict duty. It had sparked something in him, a mixture of indignation at the world's injustices and a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could see him for who he truly was. He recalled the sound of Veronica's firm voice and the fleeting glimpse of vulnerability behind it. It was as if, in that brief moment, they both had let their guards drop just enough to acknowledge their shared struggles. As the aircraft climbed higher, the confined space of the cabin seemed to draw every emotion into sharp focus. Veronica moved among the rows, offering water, checking seat belts, and smiling at those who tried hard to smile back. Yet, her mind kept returning to Darius. Every time their eyes met, even if only for a second, it felt as though they were silently speaking of their own battles, his with a world that often saw him only as other, and hers with a past she had buried beneath a neatly pressed uniform. A few minutes later, a low murmur of discontent began to rise from the row ahead of Darius. A man, clearly irritated by the placement of his carry-on bag, started grumbling about the inconvenience. Veronica approached, her voice soft and apologetic. "Sir, I'm sorry about the mix-up. Could you please check if your bag might have been placed in the overhead locker?" she asked, her tone as gentle as it was firm. The man's response was curt, and the exchange quickly escalated as nearby passengers began to murmur their own opinions. Darius listened intently, feeling the sting of every word. He knew too well how a small issue could magnify into an affront when you're already carrying a heavy past of being underestimated. Veronica's intervention, though efficient, left Darius with more questions than answers. Was her frustration aimed solely at maintaining order, or was it also colored by a personal history of feeling compelled to enforce rules that she herself found unjust? As he stared out the window at the drifting clouds, he felt a growing urge to understand her, a desire to see beyond the role of the flight attendant and to glimpse the person hidden behind the crisp uniform. Later, during a lull in service, Veronica found a rare moment of solitude in the narrow galley. The steady whir of the air conditioner and the soft clink of utensils in a nearby cart were the only sounds that punctuated her thoughts. Leaning against the cool metal of the counter, she allowed herself a private moment of reflection. "Why does it hurt so much?" she whispered into the quiet. Memories of a life filled with luxury and expectation mingled with the stark realities of the day. Each act of kindness she offered masking a deeper sorrow. She remembered how long ago she'd once had every advantage in life. Now, she'd chosen this path, not out of necessity, but as a way to connect with humanity in its rawest form. And yet, every time she met a pair of questioning eyes like Darius's, she felt the pull of that old life, and the secret that she fought so hard to keep hidden. Across the narrow aisle, Darius's thoughts swirled in parallel. The earlier incident, the low murmur of discontent, and the forced smiles around him all stirred up memories of a life where every day was a battle to be heard and respected. He remembered the countless times he'd been dismissed with a single look, the subtle yet persistent reminders that he was seen as different, as lesser. Now, in the dim light of the ascending plane, his resolve began to harden. He had long grown accustomed to being misunderstood, but the earlier encounter with Veronica had awakened something inside him, a hope that maybe, if only for a moment, someone could see past his exterior and recognize the pain, the passion, and the fierce determination that lay beneath. As the flight pressed on, the cabin became a microcosm of the larger world outside, a place of transient connections and fleeting moments of honesty. A minor dispute over a misplaced seat erupted quietly near the front of the plane. A passenger in a neat suit argued with another over whose reservation was correct. The voices were low at first, then gradually rising in intensity, until Veronica was forced to step in once more. "Please, let's all remain calm," she said, her tone even yet imbued with an authority that left little room for further argument. Her words, meant to restore order, inadvertently stoked the inner fire in Darius. He knew the sting of being ordered around, of having his dignity reduced to a set of instructions that made no allowance for the complexities of being human. When the plane shuddered briefly in a bout of turbulence, the cabin fell into a collective gasp. For a few long seconds, the ordinary conflicts melted away as every soul aboard was united by a common fear. The roar of the engines seemed to envelop them, and in that suspended moment, Veronica's calm smile and Darius's tense grip on his armrest became symbols of survival in a world that was as unpredictable as it was indifferent. Once the turbulence passed, a shared relief seemed to momentarily bridge the gap between them. Veronica approached Darius, her eyes soft with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly, standing by his seat. He managed a small nod in return, the gesture speaking volumes of the unspoken bond forming in the wake of adversity. In the hours that followed, as the flight resumed its steady progress, the subtle echoes of earlier conflicts grew into layered tensions. Veronica's every interaction with a passenger was laced with a careful attempt to maintain control, while Darius's internal monologue replayed every moment of injustice he had ever encountered. Their eyes met again and again, brief, charged encounters that hinted at a possibility of understanding deeper than simple politeness. Each glance was a silent conversation, an unspoken acknowledgement that both of them carried scars inflicted by a world quick to judge and slow to listen. Then came an announcement over the PA system, a small delay due to a technical check. The news, delivered in a flat monotone, sparked a murmur of discontent among the passengers. A ripple of frustration spread like wildfire, and soon enough, voices rose in complaint. Veronica's calm was tested as she moved through the cabin, her voice gentle yet firm. "Please, everyone, remain seated and try to be patient. We are working hard to get things back on track." Even as she spoke, Darius's heart pounded with familiar anger, the anger of someone who had been told, time and again, that his discomfort was less important than maintaining order. The delay stretched on, and the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. Passengers exchanged sharp words and uneasy glances, and every small setback seemed to fan the flames of old resentments. In a quiet corner near a window, Darius muttered under his breath about the injustice of it all, his words barely audible over the drone of the engines. Veronica, ever vigilant, heard his quiet protest as she passed by. Stopping for a moment, she leaned down and said softly, "I'm sorry if today has made you feel like you aren't being heard." Her voice was sincere, a blend of regret and empathy that suggested she too bore the weight of unspoken burdens. Darius looked up at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of surprise and something else, a cautious hope that maybe, in that simple moment of acknowledgement, lay the beginning of something real. The hours wore on, and with them, the delay began to show signs of easing. Yet, the events of the day had left an indelible mark on everyone aboard. Veronica's mind churned with memories of every harsh word and every small kindness, each one a thread in the intricate tapestry of the day. She recalled the elderly gentleman who had quietly thanked her with trembling hands, the young woman whose eyes brimmed with tears of both frustration and relief, and the child who had clutched a teddy bear, seeking comfort in a world that seemed too big and confusing. In every face, she saw a reflection of her own hidden pain, and a reminder of why she had chosen this life, this unassuming role where every act of kindness, every moment of genuine care, could be a quiet act of rebellion against a world steeped in inequality. Darius, for his part, was no less affected. The small conflicts and misunderstandings he had witnessed throughout the flight had stirred up memories of past indignities, the constant need to prove himself in a world that had never truly given him a fair chance. Yet, amid the bitterness of recollection, there was also a growing resolve. The shared moments of vulnerability, when Veronica had reached out to him, when strangers had quietly expressed their solidarity, had begun to chip away at the armor he had built over the years. He wondered if perhaps the day's turmoil was not simply an unfortunate interruption, but the very catalyst for change. Perhaps it was in the midst of such conflict that true understanding could be found. Over the course of the flight, small sparks of connection began to light the darkness. In a quiet exchange near the overhead bins, while restocking a cart of drinks, Veronica and Darius found themselves engaged in a brief, yet earnest conversation. "I've always believed that every person's story is worth hearing," she said softly, her eyes meeting him with a sincerity that went beyond the boundaries of her job. "Sometimes the rules we're meant to follow only hide the truth of who we really are." Darius, his voice low and measured, replied, "And sometimes the truth hurts because it reminds us of all we've lost and all we're still fighting for." Their words, spoken in the soft cadence of shared understanding, wove a fragile thread between them, a thread that promised, however uncertainty, that their individual battles might someday merge into a collective hope for a better tomorrow. But even as these personal moments unfolded, the larger currents of tension and conflict continued to rise around them. A minor argument over a misplaced boarding pass, a misunderstanding between passengers of different backgrounds, and the ever-present whispers of a system that seemed determined to keep people apart all compounded into an atmosphere of unease. Veronica's secret, The hidden truth of her past wealth and the life she had renounced remained safely locked away, yet it nagged at her with every passing minute. There were moments when she caught herself wondering if her carefully crafted simplicity would one day unravel, exposing the glittering world she had left behind. And while that thought terrified her, it also lent her an inner strength, a reminder that every sacrifice had its price, and that the cost of living authentically was sometimes measured in quiet, unyielding resolve. By the time the flight began its descent for an unscheduled landing, a precaution prompted by a minor technical glitch, the accumulated tension seemed to peak. As the captain's calm voice announced the change of plans, the cabin fell into a hush. For a few long, suspended seconds, every soul aboard felt the weight of uncertainty, the vulnerability of being trapped between the sky and the ground. Veronica's heart pounded as she stepped forward to reassure the passengers once again, her voice steady even as the conflict within her threatened to spill over. Darius, gripping the armrest with a mix of apprehension and defiance, watched the scene with eyes that had seen too much injustice to ever be easily pacified. After the smooth, if unexpected, landing at a nearby airport, the passengers began to disembark into a terminal that was both familiar and strangely transformed by the day's events. Veronica's colleagues spoke in hushed tones about the delays and the minor mishaps that had marred what should have been a routine flight. And as Veronica and Darius went their separate ways in the throng of travelers, each carried with them a part of that shared, turbulent experience, a memory of rising tension and fragile connection that neither could quite shake off. In the days that followed, the echoes of the flight reverberated in their everyday lives. Veronica returned to work with a renewed sense of duty and an ever-deepening inner conflict. Late at night, when the world was silent and the demands of her role were far behind her, she would lie awake and replay every word, every look exchanged on that flight, each one a reminder that the life she had chosen was as much about sacrifice as it was about empathy. And in those quiet hours, the secret she guarded so fiercely pressed against the edges of her conscience, a hidden truth that she both cherished and feared. Darius, too, found himself changed. The flight had not only stirred up old wounds, but also sparked a determination to speak out against the injustices that had always seemed so deeply embedded in his world. Strangers on the street, colleagues at his job, and even casual acquaintances began to see in him the quiet strength of someone who had weathered countless storms. And though he never sought recognition, he felt the responsibility of being a voice for those who had long been silenced. In the brief moments when fate allowed them to cross paths again, whether in the quiet corner of an airport lounge or in the soft glow of a waiting room, their conversations were filled with careful, measured words that bore the marks of both hope and caution. Sometimes, Darius would say, looking out at the bustling terminal, "I think the world is ready for change, but only if we are brave enough to look past the labels that have been forced upon us." Veronica would nod, her eyes reflective and serious. "Change starts with a single act of kindness," she replied, "and sometimes the smallest gesture can shatter the hardest walls." Even as they spoke, the larger forces of tension and misunderstanding continued to swirl around them, a reminder that the journey toward true understanding was a long and arduous one. Rumors of investigations, the subtle scrutiny of supervisors, and the ever-present fear of exposure added layers of complexity to their lives. Yet, in the interplay of these external pressures and their own internal battles, a fragile hope began to emerge, a hope that perhaps one day, the barriers between people could be replaced by bridges built on empathy and mutual respect. In the soft murmur of a rainy afternoon, as droplets traced delicate patterns on the terminal windows, Veronica and Darius found themselves sharing a quiet conversation that would linger in their memories for a long time. "There's so much we hide from the world," Veronica said, her voice barely above a whisper, "even when we try our best to be honest." Darius's reply was thoughtful, his eyes reflecting the weight of countless unspoken stories. "Maybe we hide because we're afraid that the truth, our truth, might be too heavy for others to bear." Their words, simple yet laden with meaning, captured the essence of their struggle, the battle between the desire to be seen and the fear of what that visibility might cost. As the days turned to weeks, the rising tension of that turbulent flight settled into an uneasy calm, a calm that was filled with the promise of future revelations and the quiet certainty that every conflict, no matter how deeply buried, must eventually come to light. Veronica's secret, though still locked away behind the carefully maintained routines of her everyday life, now felt like a ticking clock, each passing moment a reminder that the truth could shatter the fragile balance she had worked so hard to achieve. And Darius, whose spirit had been both wounded and strengthened by the events they had shared, carried with him the determination to keep fighting for a world where every voice mattered. In the final moments of that chapter, a chapter marked by rising tension, deep conflict, and the slow but steady build-up of a connection forged in adversity, the terminal lights dimmed and the soft glow of dusk settled over the city. Veronica and Darius, two souls bound by a shared struggle, looked toward the horizon with cautious hope. They knew that the conflicts they had faced were only the beginning, that the forces of misunderstanding and prejudice still loomed large over their lives. Yet in the quiet spaces between the chaos, there was also the promise of change, a promise that the journey toward true empathy and justice was one they would continue to walk, together, if only in spirit. In that twilight, as the last echoes of the day faded into silence, the unspoken truth of their shared experience remained, a truth that whispered of future confrontations, of secrets yet to be revealed, and of a final twist that would force them to confront the deepest parts of their souls. The tension was rising, the conflict was far from over, and the promise of transformation hung in the air like a fragile, yet unyielding, beacon of hope. And so, with hearts heavy yet determined, they stepped forward into the unknown, each step a testament to the power of understanding and the courage to face a future where every hidden truth, every suppressed emotion, would one day have its day in the light. Veronica's heart pounded as she stepped off the plane into a hushed, nearly deserted airport corridor. The earlier tensions and the unspoken connection with Darius had followed her like shadows, and now, in the cool afterglow of an eventful flight, everything seemed poised on the edge of revelation. The fluorescent lights overhead threw long, wavering reflections on the polished floor as she made her way to a quiet corner of the terminal, a small seating area where few lingered after the chaos of travel had subsided. Darius had already left the plane. He moved with a measured purpose through the terminal, his thoughts still churning over the day's events. The memory of Veronica's firm yet vulnerable look, the weight of her carefully chosen words, and the bitter tang of unspoken truths drove him forward. He was determined to understand the contradictions he saw in her, the gentle kindness that belied the sting of authority, the compassion that flickered in her eyes even when her tone was harsh. He could not let the questions go unanswered. In the quiet lounge area, away from the bustle of arriving passengers, Veronica sank into a worn armchair. The softness of the leather offered little comfort compared to the storm inside her. She reached for her water, but her hand trembled. Every moment of the day, the terse exchanges, the subtle challenges, the compassionate interventions had been a rehearsal for something bigger. Deep down, she knew that sooner or later her carefully guarded secret would come to light. And now, in the stillness of that nearly empty space, the past and the present were colliding. A few minutes later, Darius appeared at the threshold of the lounge. His presence was quiet but insistent, a calm determination etched on his face. For a long moment, he simply watched her, as if trying to reconcile the image of the flight attendant he had encountered with the person he sensed was hidden beneath that unassuming exterior. Finally, he stepped forward. "Veronica," he said, his voice steady but edged with emotion. "I've been thinking about everything that happened today, the way you spoke, the way you handled the chaos. There's something about you, something I can't quite put my finger on." Veronica looked up slowly, meeting his gaze with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "I know you have questions," she replied softly. "I've been trying to answer them myself all day." Darius moved to sit across from her. The tension between them was palpable, more charged now with the promise of truth than with the earlier friction on the plane. "You carry yourself with such authority, yet there's a tenderness in your eyes. I can't help but wonder if you're fighting against something far larger than just a delayed flight or a misdirected boarding pass." Her eyes flickered with something almost imperceptible, a glimmer of hesitation, perhaps regret. "Sometimes the world forces us to wear masks," she said. "I've spent so many years learning how to hide parts of who I am. It makes life simpler, at least on the surface." Darius leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But what if those parts of you are what make you truly real? I've spent so much of my life being defined by how others see me, a name, a color, a role assigned before I could even speak. I see you, Veronica, and I feel there's more you're not telling me." Veronica's fingers trembled as she wrapped them around the armrest. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths and the weight of her secret. Finally, she exhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for a long-avoided confession. "There was a time," she began in a hushed tone, "when I had everything anyone could ever want. A life of luxury, power, and influence. I was born into wealth, a fortune measured in billions. But that world, it was cold, detached. It made me feel isolated, like I was living behind a gilded cage. I chose to leave it all behind, to become someone ordinary. I became a flight attendant so I could reconnect with life in its raw, unfiltered form. I wanted to feel the pulse of everyday struggles and joys, to see people not as numbers in a bank account, but as souls with stories. I wanted to belong to both sides of the divide." Darius's eyes widened. He searched her face for signs of falsehood, but found only truth in the sorrow and determination that shone there. You gave up everything," he whispered, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "All that wealth, the life you could have had, why would you choose this path?" Veronica's gaze drifted to the window, where the fading light painted the terminal in soft hues of dusk. "Because I needed to know what it meant to be human," she said. "Money can buy comfort, yes, but it can never buy connection, empathy, or the courage to fight for what's right. I've seen so many people judged by appearances and circumstances, and I realize that true worth is measured in the depth of our kindness and the strength of our convictions." Darius was silent, absorbing her words. The revelation shattered his assumptions. For so long, he had been convinced that the world was strictly divided, those who had power and those who did not. Now he was staring into the eyes of a woman who had deliberately forsaken the privileges of her birth in order to understand the struggles of others. The irony was not lost on him. "I can't believe it," he murmured. You're one of the richest people in the world. And yet, you chose this humble life." A small, bittersweet smile played on Veronica's lips. "It wasn't an easy decision," she admitted. "There were days when I missed the comfort of my old life, when the allure of endless possibilities tugged at my heart. But every time I saw someone dismissed or overlooked, every time I heard the pain in a stranger's voice, I knew that I had to be here, to fight, to care, to make a difference in ways that money never could." The confession hung in the air, mingling with the low hum of the terminal's air conditioning and the distant echoes of departing footsteps. Darius felt a rush of conflicting emotions, admiration, disbelief, and a profound empathy that resonated with his own lifelong struggles. "I'm speechless," he finally said. His voice was thick with emotion. "All my life, I've been fighting for recognition, for dignity. And here you are, a woman who could have lived in a world of luxury, choosing instead to walk among us, to share our burdens. I don't know what to say." Veronica's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she reached out, placing her hand gently over his. "There is nothing to say," she whispered. "Sometimes the most powerful truths are felt, not spoken. I understand the anger and the hurt that you carry. I've carried my own share of pain. But I promise you, every sacrifice I've made, every moment of vulnerability, has been to remind us all that true strength lies in our ability to care for one another." The moment stretched, fragile and luminous, as if time itself had paused to bear witness to their shared revelation. Outside the lounge, the sounds of the terminal slowly resumed, a gentle murmur of voices, rolling suitcases, and the occasional distant call over the PA system. But inside, for Veronica and Darius, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, standing on the precipice of a new understanding. Just as Darius was about to speak again, a commotion stirred near the entrance of the lounge. A well-dressed man in a tailored suit, his face set in an expression of barely concealed urgency, approached them. "Veronica Steele?" he inquired, his tone professional, yet edged with a hint of insistence. Veronica tensed, her eyes meeting him with a mixture of resignation and defiance. "Yes, that's me," she replied cautiously. The man introduced himself as Mr. Langford, a representative from a prestigious financial institution, and, more shockingly, someone from Veronica's former world. "I'm here on urgent business," he said. "There's been a situation regarding some accounts that require immediate attention. I must speak with you privately." Veronica hesitated, glancing at Darius as if seeking an unspoken cue. The air thickened once again as the moment hung between duty and personal revelation. Darius's gaze never left her face, his expression a blend of concern and silent encouragement. "Go," he said softly, almost imperceptibly. "Do what you must." With a reluctant nod, Veronica rose and followed Mr. Langford out of the lounge, leaving Darius behind. For several minutes, he sat there, replaying their conversation over and over in his mind. The revelation of her secret had been a shock, but it had also opened a door to understanding that he had long thought impossible. Now, as he waited, a storm of questions and emotions roiled within him. Who was this Veronica really beyond the soft-spoken words and the gentle smile? And what would it mean for both of them now that her hidden past was exposed? Later that evening, in a private meeting room arranged at a small hotel near the airport, Veronica and Mr. Langford sat facing each other. The room was quiet, lit by a single lamp that cast long shadows on the walls. Mr. Langford's tone was businesslike as he presented documents and figures, but Veronica's mind was elsewhere. Every word he spoke reminded her of the life she had left behind, a life where money and power reigned supreme. Yet here she was, torn between her past and the life she had chosen, a life where empathy and connection mattered far more than the weight of a bank balance. "I'm aware that my disappearance from that world caused quite a stir," Mr. Langford said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "There are questions from investors and board members. They want to know why someone with your influence would choose such unorthodox pursuits." His eyes were steady, but there was an undercurrent of disbelief in his voice. Veronica took a deep breath and opened the envelope. Inside were reports, financial statements, and photographs from events she had once attended with careless abandon. The evidence was irrefutable, a life of wealth and privilege that now seemed a world away from the cramped aisles of an airplane or the humble smiles of everyday passengers. "I did not abandon my responsibilities lightly," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I left because I saw that money could never mend the invisible wounds that divide us. I left to remind myself, and to remind others, that we are more than our circumstances." Mr. Langford studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity in her words against the cold facts laid out before him. "Your actions have created ripples," he finally admitted. "In some circles, people believe you're wasting your potential. In others, they're inspired by your choice. But you must understand, this isn't just about you. It affects so many: shareholders, employees, even the public's trust." Veronica's eyes glistened with quiet determination. "I understand," she said firmly. "But what is the value of a company or a fortune if it doesn't stand for something greater? I can't be complicit in a system that measures worth only by numbers when human life is so much more precious." The conversation turned from business to philosophy, from figures on a page to the very essence of what it meant to be alive and free. By the time Mr. Langford left, there was no simple resolution, only a promise of change, a promise that the truth could no longer be hidden. Veronica knew that exposing her secret fully would spark controversy, that many would see her as a traitor to her own class, while others would hail her as a champion of the common man. But as she walked back to the hotel lobby later that night, she felt an unexpected lightness in her step, as if the burden of her secret was finally beginning to lift. At the same time, Darius was forging his own path. In the days that followed the flight, he became increasingly involved in community efforts to address the injustices he had long endured. His quiet strength and unwavering resolve caught the attention of local activists and community leaders. People began to see him not just as another victim of prejudice, but as a voice for change, a symbol of resilience in the face of a system that had long tried to silence him. And throughout it all, he thought of Veronica, not as the stern flight attendant he had once known, but as a courageous woman who had risked everything to stand for what was right. One afternoon, several weeks later, Darius found himself speaking at a community forum held in a modest community center. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, those who had experienced injustice firsthand, and those who had only just begun to understand the subtle ways in which the system was rigged against the vulnerable. As he spoke passionately about dignity, equality, and the power of empathy, he could feel the weight of every story in that room. He spoke of the small, everyday acts of rebellion that, over time, could shift the balance of power and bring about true change. In the midst of his speech, he paused and said, "There are those among us who have lived a double life, those who have chosen to walk away from privilege in order to embrace the struggles of the common person. Their courage reminds us that every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, has the power to transform our world." His eyes swept over the crowd, and for a moment, it was as if every person present was sharing in that silent commitment to a better future. After the forum, as the audience slowly filtered out, Darius was approached by a young man with tears in his eyes. "Your words, they give me hope," the young man said softly. I always felt invisible, like my story didn't matter. But today, I believe that change is possible. Darius smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. We all matter, he replied. And sometimes the hardest truths can lead to the most beautiful transformations. That evening, as the city settled into a quiet calm, Veronica and Darius met again, this time in a small, warmly lit cafe away from the harsh fluorescent glare of the airport. They sat at a corner table, the hum of quiet conversation and soft music creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. Veronica's eyes shone with the residue of recent revelations, while Darius's carried the steady glow of newfound purpose. I've been thinking a lot, Darius began, his voice earnest. I used to believe that the world was split into two parts, the powerful and the powerless. But you've shown me that sometimes the most unexpected choices can redefine those boundaries. Your secret, it's not just a tale of wealth and sacrifice. It's a reminder that true power lies in our ability to choose compassion over convenience. Veronica reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I never expected you to understand right away, she said softly. But every day I spend among everyday people reminds me that life is not about the fortune you inherit. It's about the fortune you create in the hearts of others. I've learned that wealth isn't measured in dollars or assets. It's measured in moments of kindness, in the courage to stand up for what is right. Their conversation continued long into the night, a gentle exchange of hopes and regrets, of dreams deferred and promises renewed. In that quiet space, the scars of the past and the uncertainties of the future were acknowledged and embraced. There were no grand proclamations or dramatic gestures, only the steady, sincere realization that both had come a long way from the day their paths first crossed on that crowded flight. Over the coming months, the impact of their choices rippled outward. Veronica's decision to live a life of service, once a hidden secret, became an inspiration to many. She began to speak at events, not revealing all the details of her past, but sharing the lessons she had learned about the true meaning of wealth and connection. Her story sparked discussions about the nature of privilege, the responsibilities of those born into abundance, and the possibility of transformation through empathy. Meanwhile, Darius continued to champion the voices of the marginalized, organizing community initiatives that brought people together to address social injustices. His journey, marked by personal pain and hard-won triumphs, became a beacon of hope for others who had long been silenced by a system that saw them as less. In time, the community began to change. The local newspapers carried stories of grassroots movements that challenged entrenched power structures. Public meetings were filled with honest, raw conversations about race, class, and the value of every human life. And at the heart of these changes was the quiet partnership between a once-hidden billionaire flight attendant and a man who had long fought to be seen as human. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves turned gold and the air carried a hint of winter's chill, Veronica and Darius walked together through a park where a community rally had been organized. People gathered around a makeshift stage, their voices rising in unison as they called for justice, equality, and the courage to be kind. Standing side by side, Veronica and Darius shared a look that spoke of battles fought and victories won. Not the kind measured in bank statements or headlines, but in the soft, enduring moments when hearts connect. At that moment, Veronica spoke to the crowd, her voice clear and resonant. We all carry secrets, she said, burdens and gifts that define us in ways that money never can. True strength is found in embracing who we are, in using our experiences to lift others up. Let our stories be a reminder that every person deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. Change begins with understanding, and understanding begins with you. Darius's voice joined hers, steady and heartfelt. Today, I stand before you as someone who has known both the sting of injustice and the warmth of compassion. Let us build a future where our differences are celebrated, and where every hidden truth can become a stepping stone toward a brighter tomorrow. The applause that followed was not merely a clapping of hands, but a chorus of hope, a collective acknowledgement that every small act of kindness, every moment of truth, had the power to reshape the world. As the rally continued, and as people dispersed into the golden afternoon, Veronica and Darius lingered by the stage. Their journey was far from over, but in that shared moment of triumph, they both understood that the path forward was paved with the courage to be vulnerable, the determination to challenge injustice, and the quiet, unyielding belief that every story mattered. Later that night, As the city lights flickered on and the world settled into its nightly rhythm, Veronica and Darius sat on a quiet bench by a small fountain. The water danced in the soft glow, and the cool night air carried the distant hum of urban life. "I used to be afraid," Veronica confessed softly, "afraid that revealing my true self would cause people to see me differently. But now I see that the truth, our truth, has the power to heal. It has the power to bring us together." Darius nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft shimmer of the fountain. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that free us," he replied. "I never imagined I'd be here, listening to a story that defied every expectation I had. And yet, here we are, two souls who chose to break free from the confines of our pasts, determined to build something better." In that reflective silence, they both understood that their journey had transformed not only themselves, but the community around them. Their story, born out of tension and conflict, shaped by moments of unexpected vulnerability, had become a call to action. It was a call for everyone to look beyond appearances, to question the status quo, and to dare to dream of a world where every individual was valued for who they truly were. As the night deepened, a gentle resolve settled over them. They knew that challenges still lay ahead. Old prejudices do not vanish overnight, and the road to true equality is long and winding. But with each step they took, with every conversation that opened hearts, a new chapter was being written. A chapter where the boundaries of wealth, color, and circumstance were no longer barriers, but bridges leading to understanding. Veronica squeezed Darius's hand, and in that touch, there was a silent promise, a promise that their commitment to kindness, empathy, and courage would continue to light the way for others. "Let this be our legacy," she whispered, "that even in a world divided by fear and prejudice, the power of a single act of honesty can spark a revolution of the heart." Darius smiled, his eyes shining with the certainty of a man who had finally found his place. "I will share our story," he vowed quietly. "Not to boast, but to remind everyone that change is possible when we dare to be real. Let our journey inspire others to look past the surface, to see the truth in every face, and to build a future where every secret, every hidden truth, is given its day in the light." In the soft darkness of that night, as the city continued to dream its restless dreams, Veronica and Darius embraced the promise of tomorrow. Their paths, once marked by pain and misunderstanding, had converged to form a new narrative, one that whispered of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of truth. And so their story carried on, a living testament to the idea that every soul, no matter how burdened by secrets or scars, has the power to change the world, one act of kindness at a time. Their journey was a call to all who listened, to share their thoughts, to speak up for those who could not, and to never underestimate the quiet strength that lies within each of us. Veronica and Darius walked away from that bench that night with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that their conversation, their revelations, and their actions had begun to ripple through the community, sparking conversations in living rooms, inspiring activists to take bold steps, and reminding each person that the courage to be authentic was the first step toward a better world. In the end, the dramatic confrontation, the unexpected twist, and the heartfelt resolution were not just parts of their story, they were the very essence of life itself. A life that was messy, unpredictable, and often painful, but also filled with the potential for redemption, growth, and love. And as the lights of the city glowed softly in the distance, a quiet call echoed in the hearts of those who had listened. Be brave, be kind, and never stop seeking the truth. Their legacy would live on in every person who dared to break free from the chains of judgment and fear, a legacy built on the simple, unyielding belief that every individual's story is worth telling, and that every secret, when embraced with compassion, can become a catalyst for change. And so, as the first light of dawn began to chase away the shadows of night, Veronica and Darius stepped into a new day, a day that promised not only the possibility of change, but the certainty that, together, they could help create a world where every voice mattered, every heart was seen, and every secret was finally free. Share your thoughts, let your voice be heard, and remember, sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a single, brave truth.